Shinji Mikami is one of the most influential game developers of all time, directing the early entries in the Resident Evil series, Dino Crisis, Killer 7, not to mention Resident Evil 4, which revitalized the entire survival horror genre and third-person shooter genre. After leaving Capcom in 2007, following nearly 20 years of work, he was employed at Platinum Games for a short while before he left again to co-found his own company, Tango Gameworks, and direct their debut game, The Evil Within. Recently, I played through The Evil Within, and in this video, I'll be talking about what I thought, and how it stacks up against Mikami's previous work, Resident Evil 4. It was very clear playing this game that it was a spiritual successor to Resident Evil 4 in particular, as opposed to the earlier, more horror and puzzle-focused games. Whether that was intentional or not, I'm not too sure. Maybe Mikami just thought he had perfected his formula and naturally ended up replicating it. Once again, we have a grim third-person shooter with a variety of weapons and hordes of enemies to take down while conserving your ammo. The game is of course an action horror, leaning more towards the action. When asked in 2014 why he thinks the genre has seemed to move away from horror, he replied, "You can't repeat the same horror tricks because people get too used to it. So when making sequels, they put in more action to try and satisfy a greater number of people." With most developers, it's not intentional, but it naturally leans that way. I myself went down that same path too. And The Evil Within is definitely very much an action game, with its Doom-like arena battles, and it usually having a big boss sequence at the end of each chapter. One interesting and unique aspect of the game is that it focuses more on psychological horror. Being set inside the mind of a twisted villain allows the game to basically do whatever it wants with the enemies and locations. This characteristic helps set it apart from RE4. The ammo conservation in this game feels much more akin to that of the classic survival horror games. In this game, Sebastian has a limit on how many bullets he can hold of each type, which adds to that feeling of dread. The feeling that you're never prepared for any encounter. That is the feeling that the classic games in the genre relied on to scare you. And it works. In my opinion, the ammo scarcity is much better in this game than in RE4, where you don't even have to worry really about ammo. One of the most intriguing parts of the game that kept me hooked was the story. The game is told in a sort of dream world where you can never be sure what's real and what's not. Your partners are always being split up as you all fall through the floor into some other location. There is a big mystery as to why you're all here. All of this leads to a very interesting setting, but at times it felt like not enough info was given to the player. Not much was explained until the very end, and even then it didn't really explain that much. I had all of these crazy, out there theories about how Sebastian's grandparents burned down the villain's barn, and that's why he was targeting him, or that the nurse in the safe room was actually related to one of the characters. But the ending felt kind of unsatisfying, as not much was made that clear. I felt like the game was kinda just being confusing for the sake of it. Also, it could sometimes feel like everything was pointless. What was the point of all the characters marching onward when they have zero control over their situation? The world is in someone's mind, and they can mess with you and teleport you around all they want. Maybe all of this stuff is explained in the sequel, but I don't know. Right now it feels very anticlimactic. The gameplay is fun, most of the time. It provides new and unique ideas for how to defeat enemies instead of just shooting them with a gun. There are traps around the world that you can kill enemies with. You also get a bolt gun with 5 different types of bolts, which can all be used differently. I only found out how funny the harpoon gun was at the very end, and I wish I discovered that earlier because look at this.
Clip it!
I upgraded my flashbolt to last super long, which let me stealth kill like 4 enemies in the duration of a single flash so I could conserve lots of ammo. Also, upgrading my critical chance on the pistol to 50% made it fun to kill enemies in one hit. You can also burn enemies when they get knocked down to kill them, and it'll also light any nearby enemies too. I heard some people talking about how this was a tense aspect of the game for them, having to burn enemies to make sure they stay dead, but only being able to hold a limited amount of matches. But I didn't have any issues at all. I upgraded my match capacity a couple of times in the early game and I was sorted. I never ran out. Also, the game is so linear that I don't understand why you even need to burn them to make sure they don't come back. It's not like you have to go backtrack over the same area again. I did like the matches though because it was really fun to burn 3 enemies at once. And now I'm going to talk about my most glaring issue with the game. The difficulty and the damage balancing. At first, there are 2 difficulty options, casual and survival. I'm not a little baby, so I played survival, and that's my biggest regret with this game. Most of the game simply didn't feel fair at all. Everything either kills you in one hit, or it'll take away 90% of your health, which means you may as well be dead, because now you just have to limp around because you don't have any heals. As soon as I would start to have fun, I would get blown up by a trap, or one-shot killed by an enemy. Even after upgrading it multiple times, the syringe heals such a small amount of your health, meaning that you feel weak the entire game. In my playthrough on survival difficulty, I died 114 times, which is insane. I was embarrassed to see this number at the end of my game, and more embarrassed to say it on the internet. And I'd like to give myself a little bit of credit and say I'm not used to aiming on a controller, so that'll account for some of the deaths probably. But I looked it up, and saw there were lots of people who had more deaths than me. Some people had over 200 deaths. Every time I died, it was incredibly frustrating because most of the time, it honestly didn't feel like my fault. Which is terrible game design, dog. I wish I had played through the game on casual difficulty because I think I would have enjoyed it more for the story and had more fun just mindlessly killing enemies without worrying about being one-shot or blown up from around a corner. Apparently The Evil Within 2 addresses these issues, and the normal difficulty setting is a lot more balanced. I hope so. Shinji Mikami stepped back from the director role on the sequel as he wanted to allow some younger talent to be able to shine at the studio. He still took a supervising role on the project though. I will be playing that game at some point, and I'm excited to see what changes they made. I want to see the continuation of the story, and hopefully they tie up some of the loose ends. Overall, I'm going to give The Evil Within a 3.5 out of 5. It had a lot of potential, but the absurd amount of unexpected deaths nearly ruined the experience for me, and the anticlimactic end to the story let it down. It was still a good experience, and I'm glad that I played. If you want to hear me talk some more about video games, then consider subscribing. My sub count tripled after my last video, so thank you a lot for that, I'm very happy. I wasn't sure if it would reach the right audience, but it really did, so thank you for the support, and thank you for watching.